So the JB Blues...
It's dedicated to Joachim Berendt Blues.
Ah, yes.
And it's dedicated by John Lewis to me.
Right.
So it would be nice maybe to start with this.
The problem with that is that we don't have any European musicians on that particular
but we
track.
have so much European here.
Yes. What's the Hongrie Woodier band like?
But this is very experimental and very, it sounds today like this best piece of the Ode, or the relatively best one, is Yordo.
Yes.
Do you want that?
I'd listen to it and not consider that one. You're not so happy with Paradox?
No.
No.
If there's one, then it's Yordo.
Yes. So this was the first major Donaueschingen jazz concert.
Yeah.
But Donaueschingen itself started before
it started
that.
way back in the 20s, before Hitler.
Yes, yes.
And then it was interrupted.
Yes.
And after the war, we took it up, Südwestfalen. And then from 54 for the first time, and at this time it was a classical festival.
Yes.
Now many festivals do have that, but in 1954 I think it was the first big international concert music festival which made a jazz concert part of it.
Yes.
And I think in this way we paved the road for many other festivals.
Did you find it hard to persuade all your other colleagues
Very,
to do that?
very hard.
Yes.
I had to use all my... I know, for instance, a few years later I was at the Edinburgh Festival in England, and the man who did this referred really to Donaueschingen and said, well, after you did in Donaueschingen, it was not so hard for me anymore to integrate jazz in the Edinburgh Festival.
Right.
That's what he said. And that happened in many other European festivals, because especially the more modern people, they very much look to Donaueschingen because it's so important for contemporary classical music.
Yes. And Donaueschingen still continues.
Yeah.
And do you feel that it still has such a significant place?
Yes, very much. Yes. I still think that those pieces which mean something in modern classical music, they are still premiered, most of them are still premiered in Donaueschingen.
Yes.
And also the composers. There is really a line of the most important people in modern classical music, say Boulez, Stockhausen, Henze, Penderecki, which all were first presented in Donaueschingen, and this still goes on like this.
Yes.
And I think it is very important to make jazz part of this very important festival, because it helps especially the classical people to meet jazz people.
Yes.
And of course it also helps us, the jazz people, to meet classical people. And many collaborations between jazz and classical people have developed from this. For instance, Penderecki wrote a piece for part of the Globe Unity Orchestra, and Don Cherry and Penderecki and Henze collaborated together, and Schlippenbach collaborated with Stockhausen, and all those things which developed out of Donaueschingen.
It's interesting. I see this bringing together of different elements, maybe from within jazz, or from jazz and contemporary classical music, or from jazz and completely different musical cultures like Indian, Tunisian.
Yeah.
This seems to me, it seems to me to be the characteristic. If I had to sum up your work, simply I would say that it's like a marriage broker.
It's really what it boils down to. I always brought people together and brought musics together and brought different things together. As you say, not only jazz and modern classical music, but jazz and many different musical cultures. When I started my world music work in the early 60s, there was not even the term world music used in jazz. Karl Berger once told me, and you know Karl Berger is one of the leading men in world music today, he once told me that probably it was me who first used the term world music in jazz. I think it was Karl Berger, but whoever it was, one of us too. I'm sure it was. See, in 1962, I first integrated a leading Japanese jazz group and a group of Japanese koto and shakuhachi players.
Yes.
That was not even the Japanese thought about it. Of course, nowadays it's very popular in Japan to do such things.
Yes.
But when I first came to Japan in 1962, I did a television production. It was a co-production of German and Japanese television, and it seemed natural to me to do this. Now it seems natural to everybody, but at this time it was really revolutionary.
And how did you find out about the music in those countries? I mean, for example, Tunisia. Did you know a lot about the music of Tunisia, or did you go and find out about it and then see the possibilities?
Both. I think, this Bedouin culture musical culture in Tunisia is one of the greatest musical culture, and nobody knows anything about it. For instance, Gregorian chanting, which is so important for the development of European music, is very much connected. Also flamenco music,
yes,
of course, is very much connected with the great musical culture of what they call the Maghreb. Maghreb is the overlapping name for like Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, those countries.
Yes.
And well, how did I know about it? I just knew about
yes.
it. It was always for me very. See, for instance, I lived 1 year on Bali, so I learned about Indonesian music. I studied Indian music in Bombay at the Ravi Shankar Music School, and just for vacation I went to Tunisia. It's near from here, so it's not so difficult, yes, and I learned about it. And I found the Tunisian musicians, and then I thought about which European musicians could be connected with it.
And did the Tunisian musicians find the ideas of jazz musicians similar to their own, or did they find it jazz difficult to work with?
For instance, they pointed out that the way of unison playing, like in bebop, like the saxophone of Charlie Parker and, yes, the trumpet of Miles or Dizzy, they play unison. It's very popular in bebop. That this is a very old tradition in Bedouin music, and they use the same way of playing unison, and they have a very similar type of phrasing, have a very similar relationship to rhythm, which, as they feel, and as some Tunisian musicologists feel, might have come from Black Africa. So it was a similar development. Some of the things we have in jazz came from Black Africa, and some of the things they have in their Muslim and Bedouin music also comes from Black Africa.
Yes.
And they pointed out these things, and the main man I found in Tunisia was Salah El Mahdi, the great Nai flute player. The Nai is the classical flute of Muslim music.
Yes.
And he also is the director of the National Conservatory for Tunisian Music, and he's the composer of the national anthem of Tunisia. And he really contributed the pieces, and then I entrusted George Grunz from Switzerland, the piano player, to arrange them and to write them down, because they have a different type of writing there, and it couldn't be read by jazz musicians. And I got a group together with Sahib Shihab. Sahib Shihab is one of the first Muslims in jazz, yeah, and it was very interesting for the Bedouins when Sahib came there, and they thought this is a jazz musician. They would have trouble to talk with him, and he could recite the surahs from the Quran in their own fluent language. And Jean-Luc Ponty was there at this time. He really was a jazz man. He was, yes, a wonderful jazz player, and I produced all his first records. His whole career in the beginning of when he was still very young, 5, 6 records I have produced with him, and I think these records really paved the way for his American career. Yes. And Daniel Lumiere at this time, it was in the 60s, really was the leading, yes, European jazz drummer, in the way he still is. Eberhard Weber was on bass, and then we had a group of Tunisian musicians, as I said, under the leadership of Salah El Mahdi.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful collaboration. It was so beautiful that when Don Cherry listened to it, he loved it so much that 1 or 2 years later, I got the whole group together again, and brought Don also to Tunisia, and we did it as a television production too. It was a television television film, a jazz television film, which got many international awards and prizes all over the world.
I must just tell you that a friend of mine who's a saxophone player in London, yes, was saying that for him the record, Jubilee Dance, with Ali Akbar Khan and John Handy is the best record in his collection.
Oh,
He was embarrass you, sir.
I love this record. It's really, for me too, of those, I think it's almost 300 records I have produced.
Yes.
But if you would ask me which record is closest to my heart, I wouldn't just mention one, but this one would be one of those.
Yes.
Those, the Karuna Supreme record with John Handy and Ali Akbar Khan. It's two records, by the way. First, when I met them in San Francisco in the late 60s, and then I brought them to the Berlin Jazz Festival,
yes.
which I had founded and directed at this time in, I think, 71. And then, at that time, I made the first record. And then a few years later, I celebrated my 5,000th radio jazz program here at the Südwestfunk. And Südwestfunk gave me a lot of money to celebrate the event, and I got musicians from all over the world, Americans, Europeans, Japanese, Indians, Indonesians, Bedouins, and so on. And when I thought about which group to invite, I invited about 7, 8 groups. Of course, John Handy, Ali Akbar Khan were the first ones I thought about. And then we did the second record, and I think the second is even better.
Yes.
And the tune, you know, the Karuna Supreme, it's really a love tune. It's
yes.
so, Karuna means love. And John Handy got the idea, you know, the Love Supreme
yes.
by Coltrane. So Karuna Supreme is just the same thing. Karuna means love too in some. Our way of expressing love, you know. And the musicians, they were, I think this is such a moving tune, and John Handy's alto solo is so full of love and emotion and insight.
Yes. Yeah, he's a marvelous man.
Yeah.
Yes. Can we talk about the Berlin Festival? Because Berlin had the reputation of being not only one of the most interesting festivals, but one of the most controversial. It had the reputation of an audience that would stand no nonsense, that could give even Duke Ellington a difficult reception.
You know, Berlin, I founded it in 1964. I had experimented with some other cities. For instance, in Essen I did a festival. It was very difficult to do a real big international festival in any German city except Berlin. So Berlin really was the obvious choice. And first they gave me permission to do just one festival in 1964. It was Nabokov, the famous producer of the famous East-West Festival. For me, is the greatest producers of festivals in the whole world, and it was always my idea to do in jazz what he did in classical music.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful break he gave me to do this festival. And then he was so impressed by the way I did it that from that year on I could do it every year. And of course it was my idea to do a controversial festival, to give musicians an opportunity to realize projects which no other festival would dare to realize. So many musicians told me they had, for instance, approached George Wein in the States or Norman Granz to do certain things, and they had said no, and then it was obvious they asked me, and we did it in Berlin. And so many things developed from Berlin which now are obvious. Most people don't know anymore that they started in Berlin. And it was so famous, you know, the Melody Maker in London, he sent a charter plane every year to the Berlin Festival, and the charter plane was booked out. Today nobody can imagine to send a charter, even from Japan. The Japanese jazz magazine is called Swing Journal. And also from Japan to Berlin, it was a fully booked charter plane coming. And the American critics, Leonard Feather, Dan Morgenstern, all these critics, they just had to come to Berlin in order to know what's happening. And today, of course, it's all over. You know, Berlin is a very obvious festival with doing the obvious things and only interested in making money and attracting people.
Yeah.
And I feel very, very sad when I think about the development of the Berlin Festival.
But it has inspired other festival directors.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of people like Nicholas Troxler
Yeah.
and Burkhard at
but
Willisau,
when
Burkhard Hennen at
when you
Mörs.
ask these people where they got
Yes.
their first ideas,
Yes.
then they all will tell you, all those people I saw every year in Berlin, and that's where they really made got their ideas, made their connections, met the musicians first.
So it has that value in its festivals, really.
Yeah, of course.
But it's interesting. If you look at the United States, there are many, many jazz festivals, but the United States does not seem to have the kind of festivals that we have in Europe,
No.
which are, if you like, artistically programmed in a particular way. And this perhaps is one of the differences between the way that jazz is viewed in the United States and in Europe.
It's viewed more or less like entertainment in America.
Yes.
You know, the Berlin Festival really, you're right, it created a tradition which is now very much alive in many European festivals. Mörs, Saalfelden, Willisau, and so on.
Yes. And it seems to me that one of the characteristics of the jazz scene in Europe over the last 20 years has been, well, certainly the willingness to experiment musically with different musicians, more so than in the United States, where you still largely have very good musicians from a same kind of background working together. There's not so much cross-fertilization, or so it appears to me. But I'm wondering, some critics would say that we've had jazz fusion, we've had different movements, we've had the music of ECM records and its particular kind of feel, its particular character. We've had the fusion of jazz music with the folk traditions of Europe, and we've had free jazz, obviously.
Yeah.
But most of these movements have perhaps lost their initial impetus, and the critics would say, well, in fact, jazz in Europe is not in a very healthy state because musicians have to look to almost gimmicks, you know, and the central thread of the music is not very strong. I mean, do you feel that's the case, or do you feel there's still a lot of development?
Well, isn't it much stronger than in the United States? What is there today in the United States? I think we have a much healthier scene over here. And so many, I mean, that's really the reason that so many American musicians are coming here. And they either live here or they come here and make their main tours, and that's what they live from, even if they live in the United States. And, you know, it was always the Europeans who really discovered new trends and new things, you know. Even in avant-garde like Anthony Braxton or the Art Ensemble of Chicago or Chick Corea, all these people first got known in Europe before they meant anything in the United States. And I mean, it is no accident that a label like ECM or today Soul Note in Milano, that these are European labels, and they are very, very important even for the American scene.
Yes.
And you know, ECM got many inspirations from what I did in Berlin and here at Südwestfunk. Everybody now connects the solo playing and the duo playing to ECM. But I did the first total solo concert in history was at the Olympic Games Jazz Festival in Munich, which was about 2 years before ECM started doing these things. And I did this in Berlin already in the 60s, and I did it here in Baden-Baden at the radio network, always being interested in having musicians playing solo and playing duos unaccompanied without rhythm section. And at this time in America this was unheard of.
Yes.
Even in Europe it was unheard of. I still remember when Milt Jackson, the famous vibes player of the modern jazz quartet, I asked him to play unaccompanied. He looked at me like not believing it. Even Cecil Taylor, I asked him in Berlin in '65, and he said, "So you do not like my musicians?" I said, "I love your musicians, but I feel you could do a beautiful solo record." And he became very aggressive and didn't like that idea. And about 8 or 9 years later, he approached me and he remembered that and said, "Didn't you talk to me about playing solo? And now I'm ready." And then we did the famous solo record, Fly, 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 Fly.
Yeah. I think that's one of his best records, actually. Personally. I'd like to ask you about some of the German musicians in particular with whom you've been associated over the years. Really the first German musician, and possibly one of the first European musicians, to become recognized as an individual contributor to jazz after the war was Albert Mangelsdorff.
Yeah.
And I know that you had a strong connection with his career.
Over his life, from the beginning, I think we were the first radio network to present him, and from that time on, and it was already in the early 50s, I think. Yeah, the first radio jazz concert ever I did, which must have been, I think, in 49 or so. There was a German group, it was called the Joe Klim group, a piano player, and Albert was a trombone player. And from that year on, there's hardly a year in our work where Albert wasn't present in. And later he approached me to produce his records, so I think his best-known records were all produced by me, either with European musicians like Wolfgang Dauner, or with American musicians like Elvin Jones and Eddie Gomez and Jaco Pastorius and Alphonse Mousson. And it was a real wonderful collaboration. I also got Albert interested in playing solo.
Yes.
You know, I heard these long, wonderful cadenzas he played at the end of his pieces. And these cadenzas always for me were pieces in itself. So when I thought about doing this concert at the Olympic Games Festival in Munich in 1970, or when was it, 72?
Yes.
When were the Olympic Games in Munich? I don't remember.
It was 1968, wasn't it?
No, it was 70 or 72. Anyway, I said, Albert, why don't you want to play solo in there too? It had Gary Burton and Chick Corea and Ornette Coleman and Jean-Luc Ponty playing solo too. And Albert, of course, was completely flabbergasted. He couldn't think about this idea. He said, I love to play solo, but I need my group in order to do so. And then, after a few weeks, he called me and said, Joe, I thought about this, and it's a wonderful idea, and I'm working already on it. And that really was the beginning of his solo career. And now, you know, of course, everybody knows in jazz how many solo records he has made ever since.
Now, moving away to another aspect of your career, because in recent years, well, you've always been known as an author. In fact, as one of the best-selling authors of jazz books. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying that possibly the biggest-selling jazz book in the world has been your jazz book, jazz book.
It's nice you say this, but meanwhile it turned out that it's not only the best-sold book about jazz, but it's the best-sold book about music, period.
Really?
There's no other book about music which sold 1.5 million copies. It's translated in 18 languages and has sold 1.5 million copies. There's no other book about music which sold so many.
Yes, that's extraordinary.
And I have no explanation why this book is such a big success. In my opinion, there are better books about jazz. But of course, it covers the whole history, and it's very open and broad-minded. And maybe it also has to do, once an American critic in the New York Times wrote, Joe Berendt writes with so much love. And I think this love is to be felt, and people like when they feel your heart in what you're writing about and your love in what you're writing about.
Yes.
Maybe this is one of the reasons, but I have not really. I just was in Paris. They published a new edition of my jazz books there, and so many French critics asked me that question in radio and television and newspapers, and it really is difficult to answer that question, why is the book such a big success?
Yes. Well, I don't know if I have the answer to that, but it's a good book. And you've written many other books about jazz, and there's also the photo book of jazz.
It's 3 photo books, the photo history of jazz, and some are only in German. The photo story of jazz, of course, is also in English.
Yes.
And the jazz book is in English and in American and French and all those languages. And it's altogether 20 books about jazz, which I
Yes.
and about 9 or 10 of those are published in other languages.
Yes. Yes.
Also Japanese, of course, is a language which has many of my books, and it's very, the Japanese are so conscious of jazz, and it's very nice for me that so many of the young Japanese musicians keep telling me that this was a book which first introduced them to jazz.
Yes. But in recent years, your writing has taken a different direction, and you're looking, it seems to me, more at the philosophical questions in music, and not just jazz music, but music throughout the world, all kinds of music.
But it very much has to do with my love for jazz, and I think it was really Coltrane's spiritual orientation. Coltrane was often here in Baden-Baden. I really can say we were friends, and I was in his house in New York and already in Philadelphia. And it was really Coltrane, also Don Cherry. But also when I studied Indian music in Bombay at the Ravi Shankar Music School, which really got me into this spiritual direction. But it has very much to do with jazz for me. And it's, I mean, I might be the only critic which went this way, but there are hundreds of musicians which did that same direction as I did, and it's always the musicians I had. There will be other critics in some years which go the same way. So, and when I do this world music work, like at my world music festivals in Baden-Baden and Donaueschinger, that famous concert in the Lincoln Center in New York, which I produced for George Wein a few years ago. I mean, George could get any American producer to do it, but he got me because he felt that I have those connections to all those musical cultures in Japan, in Indonesia, in India, in Africa, in Brazil, in order to get this concert together. And the last World Music Festival was last year in Baden-Baden in Donaueschinger.
Yes.
And it was really wonderful to have all these musicians here. It's meanwhile also issued on a record from Japan. We had Hosan Yamamoto, who is the wonderful shakuhachi player, I think the greatest of all the shakuhachi flutists. The shakuhachi is the traditional bambus flute of Japanese Zen and Buddhist culture. And Charlie Mariano was already there. Charlie went a very similar way as I did. We met over the years when he was still married to Toshiko, and he was in Japan. And then we met in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and in Singapore. And when I studied Indian music, we met in India when he was living with his guru in South India. And we always feel, when we have talked often about it, that we went a very similar direction. And from Argentina I got Juan José Mussolini, the bandoneon player, who is one of the masters of tango. And from Poland, Krzeszimir Dębski, a young violin player. I've been connected with many violin players. I think I produced almost all of them, including the old ones like Joe Venuti, Stav Smith, Sven Asmussen, of course Stefan Grappelli, but I mentioned Jean-Luc Ponty, Didier Lockwood, Krzeszimir Dębski, Zbigniew Seifert.
Yes.
So I think there's no other instrument in jazz which is represented in so many of my record productions so almost completely as the violin. Also, I can write about the violin with a lot of empathy. It might have to do with my European schooling.
Yes.
I've studied classical music, and I was an organ player in the church of my father, who was a Protestant reverend. So maybe that has to do with this feeling I have for the violin. But let me mention some of the other musicians. There is a German reed player, Alfred Hart, a free jazz player, who is wonderful on this record. And Karl Berger, of course, is there, who has so much done for world music at his school in Woodstock, and with his compositions and arrangements. The bass player is Peter Kowald, also a German musician who has lived for some time in New York. Ken Johnson comes from Trinidad, playing the steel drums. Wonderful player. Ponda O'Brien from Suriname, playing African percussion instruments. Trilok Gurtu from India, playing tabla and other Indian instruments. and the main drummer was Barry Altschul, the American musicians. And there was so much, the musicians were so happy in coming together. And they felt that this mixture we got there was just right for them. And they were so eager to contribute pieces. And even while we were playing, every morning somebody brought a new composition and said, this has to be played. And we just got around to play all those pieces. That's why I did it 1 year later in Donaueschinger again, because I had so many wonderful pieces left that I just figured we have to play all this beautiful music.
And this is a nice idea, isn't it? You bring the musicians together for, what, 5 days, isn't it?
5-6 days.
5-6 days. And there's just workshops, just rehearsing, finding out about their...
Yeah. There's no audience. We just concentrate on the music. You know, this is another difference from American producers. They have to make money from the first day, so they might give the musicians an afternoon of rehearsals and there's a concert in the evening. Nothing can develop like this.
Exactly.
But when you say the musicians, you have 5 or 6 days just to play, and there is no audience, and you play your music, then in the end you have a wonderful result. And when you do your concert on the 6th or 7th day of such a meeting, then it's sensational.
Yes.
It's beautiful then.
Yeah, we've already used a few of those, I think, on this program. In fact, yes, just taking what you were saying about violin, I discovered that what you were saying is absolutely correct. And in fact, your name appears in most of the records that I was looking at. In fact, we used Young Django with Philip and Larry.
Larry Coryell and Neil
And it was particularly for Philip, actually, because I think he plays absolutely beautifully in that. Sitting here now in 1986, where do you feel the next breakthrough in European jazz is going to take place? With any particular musicians or with any particular movement of music?
You know, I think jazz develops in a dialectic of hot and cool. We had this outburst of free jazz, which of course was a very hot period in the 60s. And then music became cooler and cooler, which is all right. You know, Lester Young is one of the greatest musicians in the modern jazz quartet, also is great musician, so nothing is wrong about coolness. But I think what we might have in a few years, maybe in 5, 7, 8 years, will be a new outburst of hotness, of heat, of maybe even angriness and protest, like we had so often in jazz. You know, free jazz was not the first time we had protest in jazz.
No.
In fact, when jazz was born in New Orleans, it's not to be thought of without the idea of protest.
Yes.
So this has been always important in jazz, and it will be again, because jazz is not just music. Jazz has to do with politics and with people and with sociology and with society and all this. And the jazz musicians is very much aware of the fact that he lives in today. And it's reflected in the music. Sometimes in cool, I think it's the side of resignation, which is true. In the 50s, the term was coolness. It was full of resignation. Maybe there's resignation today again, but it will turn. And there will be a new type of expressivity and strength, which we might expect in just a few years.
Good. Joe, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.